Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you live on this beautiful blue planet. And welcome to this hybrid webinar. Welcome to this hybrid seminar. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you live on this wonderful blue earth. Welcome to this webinar, which is, partially in person here in Washington, D.C., after the important International Religious Freedom Summit 2022, and partially online with friends and scholars from all over the world. And we're underlining or celebrating the International Day of Parliamentarianism with a hybrid webinar entitled Effective Parliamentarianism and the Tai Ji Men case. My role today is just to introduce our wonderful speakers, and I will do it right away after just reminding you the beauty of the word from which parliamentarianism comes of course from parliament, and it's originally a French word, parlement, which is the place where people discuss. And it's an old medieval term. We found it also in epic sagas of the French time, of the ancient French time, dating back to the Middle Ages. And of course, that has a long tradition through the modern age. And the Parlement was the place where people discussed in order to find solutions to problems for the good of the people, each and every one of them. So parliament is very tied. I mean, the very concept of a parlement is tied to the core question of democracy, where people gather and try to find solution. So it is very important that we celebrate this day, International Day of Parliamentarianism, and we tie that directly to the Tai Ji Men case, where we need to find an immediate solution to a problem, discussing it as we all do through webinars, trying to affect the common good. And of course, let me just remind you that this story of parliamentarianism, dating back to the French time, as I said, has a strong second life, so to speak, within the English-speaking world, dating from 1215, Runnymede, England, the Magna Carta, where which is the foundational document of all law history of English-speaking world. Of course, it is bounding to some extent for Great Britain, but if you browse the internet and Yale School of Law and these prestigious places, when they speak about American law, they culturally go back to the Magna Carta. Why? Magna Carta is, again, the foundation of democracy and kind of foundation of parliamentarism, because it's the basic idea is that no one is above the law, nor the ruled, neither the ruler. So at that time, the king should obey the law, which is superior to individual men. And this goes directly to Tai Ji Men. There is no one above the law. Someone made misdeed in Taiwan against Tai Ji Men, and it needs to respond to that in front of the law, and that very law should set Tai Ji Men free as soon as possible, because no wrong doing has been committed by Shifu and Dizzy. So I introduce our guest speakers for today, and it's my pleasure to introduce the first of them, Professor Massimo Introvigne, founder and managing director of CESNO, the Center for Studies on New Religions, and editor-in-chief of Bitter Winter magazine on religious liberty and human rights, which I had the honor to serve at as director in charge. Professor Introvigne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. It's bad not to be with you, but I'm already commuting with two conferences. I'm attending two conferences at the same time, one in Ireland and one in Lithuania, and 3 is too much even for me. Since today is the International Day of Parliamentarism, I want to discuss the strange case of parliamentarism in Taiwan, where this year is an important year because they have the 30th anniversary of the first fully democratic elections for the Legislative Yuan, which took place in 1992. Why Taiwan is strange? Because there was an appointment parliament during the Civil War in nationalist China, in Nanking. And when the nationalists, the Kuomintang, lost the war against the communists, all these parliamentarians escaped to Taiwan. And they were many because nationalist China had a tri-cameral system with the control yuan serving not in the function it has today, but serving as the upper house, sort of Senate. Then there was a National Assembly, and then there was the Legislative Yuan. Now, all these good people escaped to Taiwan. And the judicial yuan, so the judicial power, said all the parliamentarians will remain in charge until the Kuomintang will regain control of mainland China. So years passed and decades passed, and two things happened. Number one, as we all know, the Kuomintang did not regain control of mainland China. And number two, the Nanking parliamentarians starting to get old and die. Such things happen. And so there were less and less parliamentarians. Well, not very important because it was an authoritarian regime at any rate, but starting in 1969, some supplemental elections for Taiwanese representatives were organized by making sure that all the Nanking parliamentarians keep the majority. So as we know, in 1987, it's the end of the martial law, and slowly constitutional reforms were introduced. And finally, the surviving Nanking parliamentarians were told they had to retire. In 1991, a second National Assembly was elected. It ceased its function in 2005. In 1992, the control yuan ceased its functions as the upper house and remained as the control authority. All those familiar with Taiwan know. And finally, at the end of 91, the Nanking parliamentarians remaining were told you should all retire. And in 1992, there was the first political elections making the Legislative Yuan a fully democratically elected body. So that's why 92 is important, together with 96, which will be the first parliamentary election. Now, that's very important for the Tai Ji Men case, because many scholars, both in Taiwan and abroad, believe that the important date is in fact 92. So in 92, Taiwan really transitions to democracy. And this view also led to provisions about transitional justice. Transitional justice is the measures recognizing and indemnifying victims of authoritarian policies and punishing those responsible. So in 2018, a transitional justice commission was established in Taiwan with the mandate of dealing with human rights abuses perpetrated between 45 and 92, but not after 92. So what about the Tai Ji Men case? Because the Tai Ji Men case started in 96, and the Tai Ji Men DC, with good reasons, complain that there were abuses even after 92, and they should be covered by transitional justice as well. Very shortly, I want to offer an additional argument for this, because 92 is important. Electing freely parliaments is a key feature of democracy. But does the fact that we elect a free parliament guarantee that democracy will function and there will be no human rights abuses? The answer is no. We can have doubts about Taiwan because Taiwan is a new democracy, but let's look at very old democracy, United States, Canada, Australia, Switzerland. These countries have always been democratic, but at the same time, they have acknowledged that while the parliament was functioning, elections were taking place, electoral fraud were minimal, yet serious abuses of human rights demanding transitional justice were perpetrated. The United States has slavery until 1865, legal racial discrimination until roughly 1 century later, and together with Canada and Australia, perpetrated a number of human rights violations, later acknowledged as cultural genocide against the native inhabitants of their lands. Switzerland is a paragon of democracy, but between 1920 and 1970, the government took the children of the Yenish minority, an itinerant minority, from their parents and had them forcibly adopted by non-Yenish Swiss citizens or placed in orphanages in an attempt to eradicate their culture and their language. When I was at the OSCE, I dealt a lot with the Yenish issue and Switzerland. And all these cases are now recognized as demanding transitional justice. I insist they took place in democratic countries where elections were regular and parliament were elected. Yet now everybody agrees that horrible violations of human rights were perpetrated, and the lesson is horrible violation of human rights may coexist with free elections and democratically elected parliament. So the notion of transitional justice is not the same as it was 50 years ago. It has evolved. Canada, Australia, United States, Switzerland have recognized that there is now a new notion of transitional justice, and that should be applied also in Taiwan. The post-92 human rights violations and their victims, including Tai Ji Men, should be recognized. The perpetrators should be punished, and the consequences of these wrongdoings, including the tax prosecution that is at the core of the Tai Ji Men case, should be rectified. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Introvigne, for reminding us that human rights are not secured as such in any country, in any place, in any time. And he's able to cope with 2 or 3 webinars while I'm not able to. Sorry. And say thank you, Professor Introvigne, for reminding us that human rights are not granted as such in any country, in any time, in any place, and we always need to re-nourish that idea. Professor Introvigne is able to cope with 2 free webinars, while I forgot that we had a very important video to start with, and I'm sure we can have it now, we can see it now before going to our next speakers.
Course of future for their soul, Sam Brownback, U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom 2018 to 2021.
提升台湾在国际上
2019 Regional Religious Freedom Forum, a civil society dialogue on securing religious freedom in the Indo-Pacific region, President Tsai Ing-wen said in her speech. Taiwan's government choose to stand together with those oppression by authoritarian regimes, people deprived of their religious liberty. In 2021, President Tsai said that human rights awareness, internalized into the DNA of the government system, is an important goal of promoting transformational justice. In fact, various agencies in Taiwan always responded with a canned reply, to pass away, countless petitions stained with blood and tears.
In the summer of 2021, members of Action Alliance to Redress 1219 in Washington, D.C., participated in a 3-day International Religious Freedom Summit.
The charter that we put forward for this summit is a broad-based charter for all faiths or people of no faith at all, but it's about protecting that right of freedom of belief or conscience, freedom of religion.
Tai Ji Men case. It is not, and it never was, a pure tax case. It's a human rights case because the first human right is freedom of religion or belief.
In September, at the 88th Human Rights Council session, we renewed our appeal for Tai Ji Men. This time, we highlighted the confiscation of this Tai Ji Men place of worship by the Taiwanese government. This is another form of discrimination, just as serious, because a spiritual community cannot exist without a place of worship. Today, the situation of the Tai Ji Men can no longer be ignored in the world, and the Taiwanese government must allow the Tai Ji Men to enjoy their property, their place of worship, and to make their contribution to world peace without war.
25 senior international scholars and human rights activists just wrote this month to President Tsai asking for a political solution of the Tai Ji Men case.
Tai Ji Men's case has been ruled by the judge as not guilty 25 years ago. If the civil case ruled that they are innocent with no taxation owned and no violation of the tax collection law, the government agencies should be executed. All the judgments of the Supreme Court, whether religious or non-religious, should be the only one that is fair to our entire rule of law. The officials in the Treasury have crossed the bottom line of human rights and freedoms. Therefore, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether it is a judicial unit, or whether we are talking about our financial affairs or the IRS, must use this as a basis. Everyone must work together, and your efforts are also giving the Taiwan government greater efforts to help the Taiwan government stand in a positive force and a force of justice.
When we were young, textbooks educated us, democracy, civil servants are servants of the people. Teachers in school educates us to be conscientious, be law-abiding, be brave and be honest. When we grew up, we saw people with public authorization lie and cheat, with unjust laws and taxes, to persecute good and law-abiding people. Ho Quan Gen strong dominance, prosecutors, Bureau of Investigation, Internal Revenue Service team up, fraud, false accusation, fraudulent charges, tax bills out of thin air. This type of people disgust you, ignoring thousands of Taiwanese human rights victims.
I was only 5 years old at the time.
For me, it was a nightmare for several years.
Become a historical sinner cast aside by generations. President, officials, and legislators, who once embraced the ideal of serving the people. When the people empower you, please do it with conscience and commit to the oath of righteousness. Don't be the adult you hate. Choose between virtue and ability. What can you do for the world? Be a warrior of conscience. Don't let an unjust world change us. Instead, let us change the unjust world. With conscience, we will realize the value of our life.
It is now my privilege to introduce Mr. Thierry Val, Director of the Coordination des Associations Particulières pour la Liberté de Conscience in France. Mr. Val, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers to invite me to this important conference and seminars. And as you mentioned before, Marco, parliamentarism in France have a very long history. So I will illustrate in my speech the French history of parliamentarism. French parliamentarism has a very long history that goes back well before the famous French Revolution of 1789, which changes the French politics from a monarchy of divine right to a republic, and which generated the first Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen, whose articles remain the fundamentals of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in force today. Indeed, one of the most famous precursors of the spirit of the Republic is Montesquieu, who, as early as 1748, with his book De l'Esprit des Lois, The Spirit of Law, inspired the French Constitution and embraced the new political concept into the philosophers of the century of Enlightenment, such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot, were the first framers. From the French Revolution to the present day, parliamentarism has had various forms and has evolved throughout the different republics that France has known. From the tumultuous First Republic resulting from this French Revolution, the Parliament laid the foundation of the French Republic, but quickly collapsed with the advent of the Empire of Napoleon I. It is again a revolution which will give birth to the Second Republic, imprinted with a humanist impulse driven by speeches of deputies such as the famous author and politician Victor Hugo, and from which will come out the maxim liberté, égalité, fraternité, freedom, equality, and fraternity. This parliament abolished slavery and instituted the first universal suffrage. After the episode of the Second Empire of Napoleon III, the Third Republic will be born from the French defeat against Prussia and another revolution known as the Commune. It is the longest lasting republic, almost 17 years. It was full of political and moral scandals. Its long parliamentary life brought about profound change in the French society with, for example, the law of 1905, which ratifies the separation of the churches and the state. It is also this parliament which succeeded in making the Sacred Union, l'Union Sacrée, which welded together all the parliamentarians and from all political or religious tendencies at the beginning of the First World War in 1914. It was the Second World War that put an end to these 70 years of parliamentary life. The parliamentarians of the very brief First Republic have the arduous task to reconstruction and decolonization. Today, France is still under the Fifth Republic, which, despite some major advances in human rights, such as the abolition of death penalty in 1981, also knows, unfortunately, like the previous ones, its share of human rights violation, sometimes even instigated by the parliamentary decision. To illustrate this, I will develop the most flagrant case of a parliamentary decision having generated a restriction of the freedom of religion or belief, violating the principle instituted by this same parliament in 1905 on the separation of churches and state. This particular event was unique in the history of the French parliamentary life. It was the result of 3 parliamentary commissions of inquiry. The one of 1995 led to the establishment of a blacklist of 772 religious and spiritual movements. The one of 1999 for subject to sect and the money, and the one of 2006 was about sect and children. And in 2001, the same parliament voted a law known as the Abu Pikar law, which intended to dissolve all movements qualified as sect. This resulted in a climate of hysteria in France and a witch hunt against all these movements. Around these same years, the Tai Ji Men in Taiwan suffered similar persecution, undue tax assessments, confiscation of properties, stigmatization, and persecution of members. In France, faced with this wave of injustice caused by this parliament, which was supposed to protect all the citizens from unequal treatment, the incriminated French movement has organized themselves. Like the Tai Ji Men today, they fought on all fronts. I will briefly mention two cases that illustrate this fact already developed more precisely in previous seminars. The Jehovah's Witnesses gained by obtaining redress from the unfair tax audit at the European Court of Human Rights, or the Church of Scientology is gaining condemnation of the French state for gross negligence. In parallel, associations such as CAPLC and the organizer of this seminar, CESNUR and HRWF, and many others have denounced these parliamentary abuses to national and international authorities and have succeeded in making this discriminatory French policy known and condemned. In conclusion, this case in the history of the French parliament showed that parliamentarism does not always prevent but can even lead to human rights violation. But this is not a fatality. Therefore, the mobilization of civil society can change the course of events. For these reasons, the Tai Ji Men must persevere in their struggle to be rehabilitated and must continue to raise awareness of their cause and defend it for justice. Thank you for your attention.
Now go to our third speaker for today, Dr. Hollyfolk, professor in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Western Washington University. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I'd like to express my appreciation for the invitation to speak here, to attend the IRF Summit, to meet with these colleagues and so many people advocating religious freedom around the world over the past few days. I teach comparative religion, and so my comments will not focus entirely on Tai Ji Men, but speak about a larger problem in the world pertaining to parliamentarianism. And Marco, it's so great to have you as a friend, but I'm going to respectfully take an entirely different tack from you in terms of thinking about parliaments. Yeah, I'm a known contrarian. To point out, in following with Dr. Val's comments about parliamentarian in France, that in many countries, religious persecution actually happens through parliaments, and parliaments are not an effective block for persecution, but they actually facilitate it. We see this obviously in France and Belgium, China, Russia, France, even in places like Hungary. And there's a push, I think, around the world right now to regulate religion more. And so I see this as the possibility of something that could spread to many other nations. The issue of religion and politics intertwines governments, courts, the general population, and religious groups, both large and small. This means that there's a perception sometimes that religions are politicized. This can be true, sometimes this is not true, and very often there's a substitution of religious minorities for religious majorities when cases about religion and politics are being made. I notice that there's a tendency among many governments to pick winners and losers. This is a human tendency, which unfortunately government systems and structures can facilitate. On the winning side, there's state support, money for churches, money sometimes for education, privileged position in society. And for the groups that are identified as targets, there's very often any number of different types of retaliation. This comes from assumptions about religious minorities and also assumptions about reigning in religions. So let me speak about both of those two things for a moment. In my presentation yesterday, I made a point that I feel very strongly, that to call a religion a cult is to frame it, not to actually speak about a distinct thing. Namely, I see cult and many other words that are labeled or applied to religious minorities, not as accurate descriptions, but simply ways to sort of present a group negatively in the media. And the other assumption, which I think is true, or I don't think the assumption is true, I think I'm right about the assumption, is that there's a growing perception that eliminating religion or reigning in religion will make the world more peaceful and more functional. And I really would like to really take issue with that right now. I very seriously doubt that removing religion from the public square will make the world a better place. Religious minorities are very often a stalking horse for religious majorities, and that's one of my main concerns, that groups that are small, that are unpopular, are easy targets for legislation that are actually directed against much larger people or groups in the population. So what should be done about this? First of all, I would suggest that governments adopt a stance of do no harm. In other words, stop active legislation against religious people and religious minorities. Governments should seek to ensure that there's equal justice under the law. One of the most disheartening things, I think, for any citizen in any country is to see unequal treatment between different groups and to realize that your government has institutionalized a certain type of favoritism. This is enormously toxic and damaging to the body politic. To the extent that religion and politics are imbricated, governments need to be honest about who is doing what where, which groups are involved, which groups are seeking to remain apolitical. My observation is more often than not, it's large religions, not small ones, that are seeking a political action. We saw this especially during the time of COVID over the past couple of years, and so let me tell you a little bit about my research. In my other life, along with researching new religious movements, I also do a great deal of work on religion and medicine. So I was asked by a major publisher to research religious minorities and new religious movements and how they responded to the COVID epidemic. I think my editors expected me to write an article that would present all sorts of weird strategies done by strange religions. And what I found was exactly the opposite. Every single new religious movement and religious minority I encountered, I researched in the United States, I also reached out to groups in other countries. No religious minority did anything that I could see to disrupt or challenge COVID regulations. Every single group I spoke with honored government-ordered shutdowns, honored regulations about their buildings, very often went online. In many cases, religious groups are still closed, in part because they're seeking to comply with government orders. And at the same time, we saw large churches, mega churches, take very strong stances against the government in the United States, in Canada, and in other countries. I don't feel it's my position to evaluate whether or not those protests should have happened. But my point is that right now, we see words like branch COVIDians thrown around very promiscuously, creating the idea that the people who are causing problems with public health are those guys, instead of recognizing that it is not the far enemy, but the near. It's groups closer to home. It's groups larger and more powerful in societies that are more challenging to governments. And my last suggestion would be to drop the hostility against religion because the stakes for the social fabric are too high. In the last election, there was the perception that Christian activists played a key and determining role in the 2016 and the 2020 elections. And yet, as somebody who studies sociology, I'm aware of the fact that since 2010, the hard right in the United States has become increasingly secularized. And if you actually pay attention to American media, there's an increasing alarm about the possibility of a post-Christian right. I don't want to end on a dark note, but I'd like to suggest to people, imagine what the world would look like without the golden rule. The secular right does not care about human rights. The secular right does not care about the common good. Religious people, at the very least, if you disagree with their teachings, at least there's common ground for the idea that we have an obligation to respect each other's humanity. The secular right doesn't feel that there's any such obligation. And so, in other words, I think that we want to keep religion in the public square, even if we're uncomfortable with those religions, because at the end of the day, it's a more safe option for religious people and secular people alike. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Falk. I'm very glad she doesn't agree with me, because I agree with her. And I just quoted your words on cults that you pronounced yesterday in an article of mine. This morning, waking up at 5 to send it back to Italy. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Donald Westbrook from San Jose State University. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So as I mentioned yesterday at IRF, I had the pleasure earlier this year of joining Massimo on a visit to Tai Ji Men, the Academy in Walnut, California. We participated in a hybrid conference there as well. And before and afterward, we were fortunate enough to tour the Academy, learn more about Tai Ji Men beliefs and practices, and enjoy a really beautiful cultural performance and a martial arts demonstration as well. So it's a pleasure to once again participate in a hybrid conference that connects scholars and activists from around the world, this time hosted in Washington, D.C., following the success and consciousness raising of the 2022 International Religious Freedom Summit. So I should also note, as usual, that I'm a religious studies scholar and not a lawyer or human rights activist. Not that these categories necessarily are or ought to be mutually exclusive. But I do, of course, want to preface my remarks with this disclaimer, because my knowledge of the Tai Ji Men case is informed by this perspective, especially as an American observer and as a researcher who teaches and works in the fields of religious studies, history, sociology, and even information science. So that all being said, I find the Tai Ji Men case and recent developments to represent a very distressing example of Taiwan's failure to live up to its democratic promises, processes, and ideals. And in many ways, it represents, as Massimo has written in a recent article in Bitter Winter, a missed opportunity. It is a missed opportunity with respect to legal rights, human rights, and religious freedom and belief, certainly. But it's also a missed opportunity for Taiwan to treat its citizens fairly, equitably, with respect to taxation and the right to protest. And it's a missed opportunity for Taiwan to realize its full potential as a democracy in which pluralism and religious, cultural, spiritual diversity are valued and respected according to both the letter and the spirit of the law. And Taiwan's legal and tax authorities must truly practice what they preach and not privilege or penalize one group over another. So my research into Tai Ji Men and its membership is still in its relatively early stages, and I look forward to continuing this line of work in the coming months and hopefully years. But even at this point, I'm quite impressed by the dizzy I've had the privilege to meet and the range of psychological, social, and spiritual benefits that members receive in their practices and daily lives. And I firmly believe the fuller and more empathetic understanding of a group and its practices can be a powerful antidote to intolerance, prejudice, and misunderstanding. And a focus on members themselves, it humanizes rather than demonizes. It opens the door for dialogue rather than monologue, and it fosters trust and transparency that is essential for individuals and groups to communicate, cooperate, and move past differences in a productive manner. And in fact, I suspect that religious and cultural literacy may very well be one deciding factor that could help contribute to a satisfactory resolution of the Tai Ji Men tax case, as misunderstanding and prejudice slowly but surely gives way to understanding, tolerance, and justice. The good news is that Tai Ji Men is very open to outsiders from what I've seen, and there are numerous convenient ways to learn more about the group online, on social media, and in print publications. One example that I've really enjoyed is a book I recently read called Embodying the Wisdom of Tai Chi, Achieving Inner Peace and Balance. It offers an excellent introduction to Tai Chi psychology and includes a great variety of perspectives and testimonials from Dizzy. And unlike the other recent Tai Ji Men publications that directly relate to the court case, understandably, such as Who Stole Their Youth and the Tai Ji Men case in Taiwan, this other book, Embodying the Wisdom of Tai Ji, seeks to highlight the benefits of the Dizzy in their everyday pursuit of harmony, balance, peace, health, and well-being. And I recommend it for yourself if you haven't read it already. So I expect in a somewhat similar vein that the scales of justice will balance out in a way that is fair and favorable to Tai Ji Men. And I really think will serve as a precedent and a foundation for Taiwan to improve its record of human rights and religious freedom. And perhaps then even more powerfully, Tai Ji Men will carve out for itself and other minority groups a lasting legacy of peace, justice, and harmony. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Westbrook, for reminding us, among many other important things, which is the burden of prejudices, at some extent integrating what you said with previous speakers, and the way prejudices affect groups like Tai Ji Men and their enjoining of a full measure of human rights, starting with religious freedom. It is my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Alessandro Miccarelli, a fellow Italian, even if living in the UK, and president of the European Federation of Freedom of Belief in Great Britain. Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. In the United States, good afternoon and good evening for those of you who are in Europe and in Taiwan. Today is the 5th day of this very long 5 days of conferences, meetings. We started unofficially on the 27th. We had 3 very intense days of International Religious Freedom Summit. And today we are having this 5th day of meetings discussing about the Tai Ji Men case. A lot of information was given, many comments, and very important insights, along with a number of interesting other events, including the ringing of the bell and other cultural moments, and few more will be happening today. I only want to give some comments. Today we are talking about effective parliamentarism. Effective parliamentarism is highly connected to the principle of effective democracy. Democracy does not happen by switching from non-democracy to democracy. You don't turn the light on and by the power of magic, you have the democracy. That's why it's called transition to democracy. Transition is a process, and at times it's a very long process. Europe in 1945 started the process towards democracy after some time, very long time of bad experiences for Europe. But still now, there are issues of democracy in some European countries. And in all countries that call themselves democracies, there are issues at times. There is no perfect country in this beautiful world. When a people start the process towards democracy, they start a new era for the country. But a number of times those involved in the process of switching to democracy were previously involved with regimes. They just changed the flag they belong to. So this explains why this thing is happening to Tai Ji Men in Taiwan. Taiwan we must appreciate that the process, the transition towards democracy in Taiwan was very fast. So it was very efficient. In short time, in very short time, from martial law to democracy, the transition happened. Last month, there was the international review of the implementation of the International Covenant in Taiwan. This means that Taiwan, even though it's not a member of the United Nations for the reasons we all know, because the neighboring country doesn't want Taiwan to be part of the big family of the United Nations, nonetheless, in 2009, Taiwan decided to be bound by the content of the International Covenant, making those covenants and other international legislation part of the system, the legal system of Taiwan. The international review this year acknowledged there has been progress in some areas. There are areas that still require improvement. Very surprisingly for all of us, there was no mention of freedom of religion and belief issues in Taiwan. For some reasons, we understand that, yes, there has been probably no mention because there is religious freedom in Taiwan. Taiwan is the country where there is more religious freedom in all Asia. You can walk around Taipei and find temples, churches, mosques, and all kind of worship places. But not mentioning the Tai Ji Men case has been a very serious thing for the experts who reviewed the implementation of the International Covenant. So a few years ago, I wrote an article on healing and the importance of forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and hope in healing. This applies to Tai Ji Men as well. Forgiveness of the wrongdoers, those who did bad things to Tai Ji Men must be forgiven. But forgiving does not mean not to make them liable. The law, as Marcus said, applies to everyone. That's the revolution of democracy. Nobody stands above the law. The law applies to everyone. Forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, hope for the change, hope for a full democracy being implemented in Taiwan. But all of this cannot happen without commitment. Commitment to the law. Commitment to make the change happen. And the commitment applies to the legislators, to the politicians, to the bureaucrats, to the people of Taiwan, and to all of us. That's why we are here today, committed to help Tai Ji Men fight and get justice eventually. I renew my appeal to the President of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, to make Tai Ji Men and Dr. Ong ambassadors of the Taiwanese culture in the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much to our panelists for integrating so well one with the others, and thank you for reminding us that there is, from different angles, there is something very, if I may, from this table, something very mysterious, even kind of mystical within the concept of law. At least the old Roman idea of use as different than lex. Lex can be difficult. The idea of use bear some resemblance, some idea of something awesome, full of awe, even mystical, as I say, because it takes places where human beings are respecting their essence, their soul, their some will say God-given rights. So thank you so much to all of you, and it is also my pleasure to deeply, warmly thank CHESNUR, the Center for the Studies of New Religion, and HR RWF, Human Rights Without Frontiers, for organizing this series of seminars and webinars, and even the one we're in today, this hybrid seminars. They are very important. Many people get to know the reality of Tai Ji Men and many others nuances like history of parliaments and, you know, many things. So a warm thank to them. And it is now my pleasure to introduce and pass on the chair of the second part of this webinar to Mr. Willy Fautré, director and co-founder of Human Rights Without Frontier in Belgium, in Brussels, Belgium. He will lead the second part of our webinar today with testimonials and very important presence. Mr. Fautré, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marco, for giving me the baton now to the second part of this webinar. Today, 1st of July, is the day after, to parody the title of a well-known disaster movie. It is the day after the official UN International Day of Parliamentarianism, fixed on the 30th of June by that institution for the first time in 2018. But instead of a catastrophic day, it is a day which celebrates and strengthens one of the foundations of our democracies. The management of a people, a nation, and a territory through a constant dialogue and constant interactions between the people and the representatives they have chosen through free, fair, and transparent elections. The Day of Parliamentarianism gives an opportunity to leaders and the intelligentsia to review the progress, or not, that parliaments have made in achieving transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. It also encourages parliaments adapting to new technologies, to new challenges, to be more inclusive, to the constant transformation of society, to better reflect the changes in its diversity. The parliament and its members are a channel through which ordinary citizens can voice their concerns, denounce all sorts of injustice, and demand redress. Human rights organizations like ours can also assist individuals or groups to have their voices heard, their grievances listened to, their problems to be solved by new laws. A personal example I want to share with you. In 1992, 700 and 1,000 Jehovah's Witnesses who were conscientious objectors to military service and any personal involvement in a war were brutally sentenced to 1 year in prison in France, a democracy. I met with a number of prison visitors who provide spiritual assistance to detained Jehovah's Witnesses. They agreed to discreetly interview the imprisoned conscientious objectors about their detention conditions by using a questionnaire based on UN standards. In all, 43 prisons were covered by the survey. A 32-page constructive report was published in 1993 with our findings. It also proposed a few recommendations drafted by French lawyers who were involved in the project. One of the recommendations was the revision of a specific article, Article L51 of the National Military Service and Article 447 of the Code of Military Justice. In February 1995, under Defense Minister Léotard, a form of alternative civilian service was set up that complied with the religious beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses. According to a ministerial circular, Jehovah's Witnesses could apply for an assignment as a social institution or a hospital up to 8 days before their call-up. In the event of war, they were assured that they would never be used in any institutions that would directly involve them in military operations. These new conditions made it possible for Jehovah's Witnesses in France to perform alternative civilian service in conformity with their beliefs. In 1996, during President Chirac's term of office, conscription was completely abolished and replaced by a professional army. We then praised the decision of President Chirac in a special issue of our magazine. In conclusion, I would say that informing correctly, without any animosity, but with determination, our representatives in our governments often do the best or can do the best way to solve problems. This is the lesson that I have learned from that experience, to be constructive, to make recommendations to members of the parliament and members of governments so that they can improve their relations with their society. I will now give the floor to a few diseases, 3 of them exactly, and they will share their feelings and their views about the role that their parliament should play to solve their problem, the problem of Tai Ji Men. The first dizzy is Jessica Kuo from Canada.
Good morning. Today is Canada's National Day, and I'm honored to be here on behalf of the Canadian disciple. Many people have expressed their opinions on the Tai Ji Men case. And today, I'll share a Canadian case of improper tax investigations and the protection of taxpayers' rights, and then compare it to the situation in Taiwan. In March 2018, the news that the Canada Revenue Agency compensated the couple for $1.7 million caused a stir. In 2010, the couple who lived in British Columbia was found not guilty on all counts after being charged with 21 counts of tax evasion in 2008. The couple later filed a lawsuit against the CRA, accusing the prosecutor, the CRA, and the senior investigator of violating their charter rights. The Supreme Court of Canada in BC stated in the decision, the CRA used state power against them to pursue malicious and false criminal charges. During the investigation, CRA investigator Kendall used high-pressure tactics, misrepresented his evidence, and deviated from his position and professional conduct, and he should be severely disciplined. In recent years, the Canada Revenue Agency has increasingly penalized the tax officers for misconduct, imposing fines, suspensions, and even dismissals. However, in Taiwan, there were 10.21 million new cases of tax and fee enforcement in 2018, an average of 27,900 cases per day, followed by 14.3 million cases in 2020 and 12.7 million cases last year. Do Taiwanese people prefer to owe taxes and fees? But can you imagine, almost half of the Taiwanese have enforcement problems, and many of them have illegal tax bills. But the Ministry of Finance almost never takes the initiative to punish officials who break the law. Taiwanese Ministry of Finance provides additional data, except for the short-term levy affected by the epidemic. The remainder of the levy has exceeded every year in the last 10 years, totaling more than 980 billion NT dollars and more than 400 billion NT dollars last year, setting a new record. But where does the levy come from, and where does it go? the Ministry of Finance has not provided a clear explanation, nor has it returned the excess tax to people in countries such as South Korea, Macau, and Singapore. The principle of taxation by law is mentioned in Article 19 of Taiwan's Constitution, which means no taxation without law. However, the Ministry of Finance has issued interpretative orders on its own, which are used to tax and punish people, and has not passed the third reading in the Legislative Yuan, therefore violating the principle of taxation by law. Members of the Legislative Assembly questioned the Ministry of Finance in 2011, pointed out that there were over 7,800 interpretative orders at that time, and requesting to be reviewed right away. However, the more the Ministry of Finance reviewed, the worse it became. In 2017, there were more than 9,500 interpretations, leaving the people at a loss. A large number of interpretative orders highlight not only the law's inadequacy, but also the fact that there are so many interpretative orders that haven't gone through the legislative process at all, but are at the discretion of the tax authorities, resulting in unfair taxes everywhere and taxpayers suffering. The Legislative Yuan cannot excuse its fault. The UN International Day of Parliamentary Institution was celebrated yesterday, and a strong parliament is the foundation of democracy. Parliament represents the public opinion and is responsible for enacting legislation, amending laws, reviewing the budget, and overseeing the government's performance of its duties. Therefore, I'd like to talk about public hearing in the Legislative Yuan of Taiwan in 2010 on how to solve the taxation case of Tai Ji Men, which was attended by 14 legislators and representatives from different parties, and more than 200 representatives and disciples of Tai Ji Men. At that time, Mr. Zhang Shenghe, the Vice Minister of Ministry of Finance and the NTB of the Central Area, agreed on the spot to the public hearing resolution, withdrawing the enforcement of the tax case against Tai Ji Men, and promising to resolve the tax case within 2 months. Following the public hearing, the Ministry of Finance sent a letter to the NTB requesting that the implementation should be withdrawn, as well as the letter to the 3 legislators, informing them that they had asked the NTB to handle it. Then what happened? The NTB has cheated the Legislative Yuan, the disciples, and the public. The tax bill was not withdrawn. The case was not resolved, and the NTB even collaborated with the Administrative Enforcement Agency to not only enforce the law with an illegally issued tax bill, but also violated the principle of proportionality by repeatedly and illegally seizing the access of Tai Ji Men and our Shifu, robbing people of the property. These officials who tell lies and break promises to the people are providing the worst type of social education. Legislative, executive, and judicial powers are divided into 3 different state organs that check and balance each other. The Tai Ji Men case demonstrates that Taiwan's 3 major powers are completely out of balance. Mr. Su Zhenchang, the president of the Executive Yuan, didn't he ever say that taxation should be revised? Ms. Chen Qu, the Control Yuan's president, didn't she stated that the National Human Rights Commission's philosophy is to serve as the country's conscience? President Tsai stated in 2019 at the Indo-Pacific Forum on Religious Freedom, Taiwan chooses to stand with the people who are oppressed and deprived of their religious freedom by authoritarian regimes. She also mentioned last year that internalizing human rights awareness into the government system's DNA is an important goal in promoting transitional justice. But where is it? Tai Ji Men case is a political embarrassment of human rights persecution in Taiwan. Our disciples advocate for legal and tax reform in Taiwan. I suggested that Taiwan should learn from Canada, an older democracy. Only through real reforms can assist the government in breaking stereotypes and moving forward to a brighter future. It is never too late for those in authority, including Taiwan's politicians and bureaucrats, to demonstrate that they care about the people they are supposed to serve and govern. Sam Brownback ever said, "We believe that the role of government is to protect a person's right to choose a future path for its soul." Tai Ji Men loves the country, upholds conscience and justice, doesn't want to harm the integrity and reputation of Taiwan and Tai Ji Men, speaks out against the shortcomings of the government, as well as to expose the shortcomings of Taiwan's judicial and tax systems, and hopes that with actions rekindle the beacon of democracy and freedom. That the light overcome the darkness, that the facts overcome the lies, and that the conscience eventually overcome the desire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. What can indeed Taiwan learn from Canada? This is what you shared with us from your experience in the country where you are living. In Canada, the parliament has put in place mechanisms to protect taxpayers against improper taxation enforcement procedures. Canada has also a revenue agency, and it has not hesitated at all in increasingly punishing tax officers for misconduct in recent years with penalties, suspensions, and even dismissals. This is the side of a vibrant democracy. And Taiwan's parliament should take Canada as a model to combat the abuses of the National Taxation Bureau, instead, as we say in French, putting the dust under the carpet. When Tai Ji Men criticizes its country, stands up to resist the failures of the national government agencies, exposes the shortcomings of the judicial system and taxation system. It's not to harm the integrity and the reputation of Taiwan, you said, but it is to make it a healthy democracy. And thank you really for your very constructive testimony. I will now give the floor to Xiao Long Ogle, a retired English teacher in Florida, but she was not born in Florida. She was born in Hanoi, North Vietnam at that time. And she had a very tragic and special life that she will share with you. The floor is yours.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and brothers and sisters. My name is Long Ogo, living in Florida. I was born in 1941 in North Vietnam. After the fall of Dien Bien Phu during the Civil War in 1945, the whole family moved to Cambodia in 1956. Shortly before Cambodia's government became unstable, my parents sent me to Taiwan for high school and college education. Since then, I have never seen my parents again. In 1975, when Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia, the soldiers killed people of different religions. As we were Christians, all my family members were executed. As I had already left Cambodia, I escaped the massacre. All my unfortunate experiences affect my personality. I became bitter and depressed. In the summer of 1996, I had a chance to visit Tai Ji Men Academy. Tai Ji Men is a group of spiritual cultivation. Its goal is to seek to advance physical, mental, and spiritual health and to awaken people's conscience. Tai Ji Men brothers and sisters grow of health and happiness, and their sincere smile immediately attracted me. Surrounded by relaxing, friendly, harmonious atmosphere, I knew it was the place for me. The anguish of losing my family as a result of war was relieved. Later, I became a Tai Ji Men member. Under the guidance of Shifu Dr. Hong Daozhi and doing Qigong exercise, I have improved myself spiritually and physically. I have transformed into a better person. Tai Ji Men and Just K came unexpectedly on December 19, 1996. The prosecutor, He Huanren, illegally searched the academy. The prosecutor could not find any evidence. He asked a tax agent to give false testimony and charged Tai Ji Men with tax evasion and accused Tai Ji Men of raising goblins. That was bizarre and became the laughingstock of the global community. He also accepted interviews by the media and discussed the case in public. Tai Ji Men immediately became the target of criticism, and Tai Ji Men immediately became the headlines of all newspapers and the main subject broadcast on TV every day. Tai Ji Men member became the targets of criticism, and its members were accused of a cult or heresy. As a teacher, I account numerous negative comments and attitudes. My colleagues and friends said I was ignorant enough to be deceived. Looking at my students' faces, I realized that my dignity and respect were damaged, although I was a very conscientious teacher. Tai Ji Men and Just Case has a very negative influence on my son. Influenced by the false accusation broadcast by the media, he even tried to stop me from going to the academy. When we served tea to our guests, they refused to drink it because they thought the tea has some kind of magical potion. My husband, Wayne Ogle, an American and not a Tai Ji Men Dizi, was very supportive. His trust in Shifu's teachings comforted me and inspired me to a greater confidence. Tai Ji Men and Just K ended on July 13, 2007, with a verdict of not guilty of all charges. Yet, the tax case derived from the Tai Ji Men case is still ongoing. As early as December 21st, 2000, Taiwan Legislative Yuan held public hearings on the Tai Ji Men case. The people present at the hearing include the president of Legislative Yuan, legislators, and the head of National Taxation Bureau, and the officials of Ministry of Education to discuss the National Taxation Bureau's claim that Tai Ji Men was a cram school. The official of the Ministry of Education testified that Tai Ji Men was no way a cram school. Legislative Yuan President Wang Qingping pointed out that the Bureau of Investigation and the National Taxation Bureaus each has their professional responsibility, and that because the Bureau used for information provided by prosecutors to impose taxes on Tai Ji Men, it has a responsibility to revoke the tax illegal imposed. Legislative Julie Ren, a professional tax accountant, stated that it was clear where justice and truth lay. The benefit which the country gains from taxing students give to their teachers caused much damage to student respect for their teachers and more damage to traditional moral values. The whole thing is insignificant, and the National Taxation Bureau should retract all improper tax levies. Legislator Ding Xiaozhong also queried the director of National Taxation Bureau about the Bureau's violation of the procedure of levying taxes, questioning whether the need to make up tax income could overweigh the need for proper legal procedure and a proper legal basis. The Tai Ji Men were never a cram school. It is a traditional organization with Sifu and Dizi, and its essential nature as a spiritual cultivation group is beyond questions. The director of National Taxation Bureau was present at the hearing, yet the Bureau illegally persisted in levying a tax, and in 2020, in concert with the Administration Executive Office, illegally put up Tai Ji Men's Self-Conservation Center for auction, ultimately confiscating it as a national property. As of today, over 300 legislators have held hearings and press conferences and implemented the National Taxation Bureau in support Tai Ji Men, but the Bureau authority had proven superior to the court. Is it not an insult to the legislative symbols of democracy? Tai Ji Men members have visited Tai Ji Men Economic Cultural Office in different states, meeting with directors of different offices and present letters to appeal Tai Ji Men and Justice, hoping our voice were heard. We have written thousands of letters to the President Tsai Ing-wen and the President of every top administration offices, yet our efforts have been in vain. Letters have reached Finance and National Taxation Bureau, but those officers who violate the law twist the fact and never admit their wrongdoing. Instead, they deceive our country and people of Taiwan, even all Taipei economic cultural offices. If a country use illegal taxation as a tool to persecute the human right, the harm and suffering are no less than the casualty caused by war. Dr. Hong and members of Tai Ji Men have been persecuted, and we have been fighting for justice more than 25 years. Our freedom of belief and human rights have been denied. We are at our wits' end. We have no choice but to reach out to global community and IRF, we hope that the voices of our justice and from the world can engage and encourage Taiwan government to end Tai Ji Men and justice, recover our freedom of belief, protect our human rights, and restore Tai Ji Men good reputation and return our secret land of cultivation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Ogle, for your testimony. Yeah, how could you have not become bitter and depressed after the tragedy that hit your family in Cambodia under the rule of the horrible communist regime of the Khmer Rouge? You were living in Taiwan for your studies when it happened, and that's how you escaped physical death. but psychologically you were deeply affected, and as it is, of course, understandable. But as you said, studying Tai Ji Men philosophy under the guidance of the Shifu, Dr. Hong, you improved yourself spiritually and, of course, physically, and had thereby access to a new life, a new harmonious life. And the Taiwanese political authorities should keep in mind the benefits of Tai Ji Men to their society when dealing with its legitimate requests. And now I will give the floor to our third and last Dizzy, Ashley, who is a university student. Ashley, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ashley, and I'm from Taiwan, a member of Tai Ji Men. I'm glad to participate in this international conference to share the current situation in Taiwan. Is Taiwan really a democracy? Let me first explain to you the results of International Review Conference for the ROC's, the third national reports on the two covenants held 2 months ago. In 2009, Taiwan signed the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenants on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and incorporated the two covenants into its domestic judicial system. At this year's International Review Conference, for the ROC's, the third national reports on the two covenants, committee members made 92 observations and recommendations. They suggested that Taiwan should include the crime of torture in Taiwan's criminal law and have independent units investigate possible torture cases. In fact, Taiwan's optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment was only sent by the Executive Yuan to the Legislative Yuan for consideration in 2018 and has not yet been passed for 4 years since then. On this day, I would like to call for a strong parliament as an important key for public opinion to supervise governance, make and amend laws to protect human rights, to fortify democracy. However, what amazes me most is that the Tai Ji Men case, a major human rights violation case, is the most revealing case of human rights persecution. With more than 300 legislators in Taiwan signing a petition, the Legislative Yuan asking questions, and public hearings being held, etc., and to demand the Ministry of Finance and the National Tax Bureau to revoke the unlawful tax bill. It is regrettable that the Tai Ji Men case agenda was dodged and thus did not appear in the observations and recommendations of the Third International Review of the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights. The Tai Ji Men case was suppressed by authoritarian means, violating Article 18 of the ICCPR. Government officials have caused tens of thousands of families to be victims of discrimination, torture, bullying, suppression of freedom or belief, restriction of personal freedom, seizure of their practice sites, use of public power to spread false information and smear, and stigmatization of the master and disciples, and so on, with the intention of eliminating this faith-based practice group. The Tai Ji Men case originated from the political purge in the name of the religious crackdown, initiated by Taiwanese governments in 1996. The torture applied by prosecutor Ho Kuan-ren violated Article 7 of the ICCPR, which prohibits torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. This Tai Ji Men case is a human rights violation case from the very beginning, which is completely against the human rights protection of the two covenants. The Control Yuan also took the initiative to investigate this case and listed the 8 major violations of Prosecutor Hou Kuan-ren, requesting that the competent authorities to be seriously investigated and disciplined. Prosecutor Hou Kuan-ren, however, have not only avoided disciplining, but also have been promoted. I was not born yet when the Tai Ji Men case occurred. This case carried on longer than my entire life. As a 弟子 of Tai Ji Men, through forums or sharings from Tai Ji Men brothers and sisters, I can tell that Tai Ji Men is a wonderful place where we cultivate ourselves, where we can learn Kung Fu of the happiness. Also, my Shifu have devoted his life to promoting love and peace, and has brought traditional Tai Chi culture abroad through more than 3,000 cultural exchanges and Qigong martial arts performances. Why should such a positive group with such a great contribution to the world be stigmatized and discriminated against its own country? I wonder whether Taiwan is truly a democracy with an open and fair governance system. I'd like to call upon the Taiwanese governments to return Tai Ji Men's sacred land, compensate for their losses, and to restore the reputation of Tai Ji Men Shifu and Dizi. I hope that we can draw more international attention to this serious human rights violation case, so that everyone can enjoy the freedom of thoughts, conscience, and religion, so that human rights can take a big step forward, and so that Taiwan moves toward a beacon of the democracy. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your testimony with us. You called for a strong parliament as an important key for public opinion to supervise government governance, make and amend laws to protect human rights, to fortify democracy. And you recall that in the Tai Ji Men case, more than 300 legislators in Taiwan signed the petition. The legislative yuan asked questions and public hearings were held to demand the Ministry of Finance and the National Tax Bureau to revoke an arbitrary tax bill. But it's not enough. And we know it takes a long time to be successful when developing advocacy in a parliamentary context. Democracy failed in the case of Taiwan for the moment. And you asked Taiwan to give back the sacred land and other properties that were illegally confiscated by the NTB in 2020. Thank you again for your contribution to this debate. And I will now give the floor back to Marco.
Yes, thank you so much, Billy, for conducting this second part of our today's webinar. We will head into the conclusion, and I'm giving the floor to Ms. Camelia Marin, Deputy Director of Soteria International Denmark, for the concluding remark. Camelia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for being part of all this event. It was an exceptionally good and full of teachings, I say, this webinar about the effective parliamentarianism and the Tai Ji Men case. And especially after the International Day of Parliamentarianism, I might say that from this perspective, we still learn. After years, depend of Europe or other states, we are still learning about democracy. And regarding the Tai Ji Men case, which started in 1996 as part of a politically motivated crackdown that in that time targeted several religious and spiritual movements, we can just ask, was it 1996 too much in the beginning of democracy for Taiwan, which started in 1992? Then why it's still ongoing now? Democracy evolved since 1996 till now, and still the case is ongoing. There are several questions that still are pending regarding how this case was handled by the Taiwan government. Of course, it was pointed out, I'll just conclude in this moment, that Tai Ji Men is a group of spiritual practice with the goal to seek for physical, mental, and spiritual health and to awaken people's conscience. The master Shifu, Dr. Hong, is guiding these members of Tai Ji Men to practice Qigong exercise, thus improving their lives spiritually and physically. And this is raising a question, at least for me, why the place of worshiping, the place of their community was seized without the organization being guilty of anything. So there are further questions also. In this webinar, there were presented several points regarding the need of the democracy and especially the impetus to truly apply what democracy means. From the very beginning, Professor Introvigne referred at the fact that free parliamentary elections, such as the one that were held in Taiwan in 1992, are a key feature of democracy. Of course, as the end of the post-authoritarian period and the beginning of democracy. But he was very much pointing out this idea: do not guarantee that all aspects of democracy will be implemented and human rights will be respected. This is also what we can see and what we conclude actually from this webinar, that even though it is theoretically democracy in Taiwan, not completely implemented in this moment. Also, Professor Introvigne pointed out an important aspect, the transitional justice, as the period between the authoritarian regime and democratic regime with elected parliament. The transitional justice should rectify massive wrongdoings which may coexist with the presence of democratically elected parliaments. Of course, several examples were given from different countries in order to see from a larger perspective and to understand that actually, even though now it's happening in Taiwan and we all looked in this case of Tai Ji Men, still we can see all around such cases happening. And Professor Introvigne was underlining, as all of you, actually the importance that the consequences of the wrongdoings, including the tax prosecution at the core of the Tai Ji Men case, should be rectified. And afterwards, we had the example given by Thierry Vallet about the French system. Even though the French parliamentarianism has a long history from 1789 to the present day, still there are several flaws in the system, and even though they are theoretically applying very much democracy, there are still cases, even one, it was mentioned by Thierry Vallet, that in 2001, the parliament voted a law known as the Abbot-Picard law, which intended to dissolve all movements qualified as sects, which actually starts a witch hunt against all these spiritual movements. And yeah, there are several details from France, and I'm sure that we all learned from this presentation. And afterwards, Dr. Falk was coming, like, additionally adding to the previous ones, that actually in many countries religious persecutions are happening through the parliament, and it is much more necessary now to regulate religion. And of course, the situation of the so-called cults, which are so easy to be targeted no matter where they are, in which country, and several cases of the religious community facing problems because of the arbitrary application of the rule of law and because of the flaws in the system of the states. And Mr. Westbrook continued expressing, and I very much enjoyed how he was making the connection with the missed opportunities. Mr. Massimo Introvigne was writing an article which was pointed out by Mr. Westbrook about how actually there are missed opportunity. And in the Taiwanese case, there are several opportunities to step further into democracy that the government is losing, and is losing just because somehow they are blinded by kind of old fashion of just accusing and just applying taxes and so on without truth, without checking, without applying correctly the law. And further, Mr. Amicarelli was just expressing very clearly that the effective parliamentarianism is connected with the effective democracy. And even though, as he expressed it, the process of transition can be a long one, as we could see also in Europe, still it is important to be done and to look for solving all this, to go further and switching towards democracy and to make these steps. And from this perspective, in his words, we could understand better the situation of Taiwan, the transition from martial law to democracy that needs some time to happen. And even though in Taiwan is religious freedom, still the case of Tai Ji Men is a proof that Taiwan needs to work much more on it. And I appreciated very much in this webinar how Mr. Respinti made a very efficient and accurate connection between all the scholars and their perspectives presented. And afterwards, how Willy Fautré pointed out in his turn about the role of a genuine parliamentarianism and the benevolence and help of it in favor of people. That informing correctly our representatives in our governments should be the best way to solve problems, to be constructive, to make recommendations, which actually came very, very wisely and very good from the 3 testimonies that we received. And at the presentation of Ms. Jessica Ko regarding what Taiwan can learn from Canada, it was so good how she was mentioning that the taxation legalism means no taxation without law, which actually in Taiwan this doesn't really happen, because even though in the Tai Ji Men case, the courts were proving that Tai Ji Men is not guilty of any breaking of the law, still the National Taxation Bureau, it's further on continuing the case and even seizing their goods. And afterwards, we had a very touchy testimony of Mrs. Ogle, and indeed, sometimes life is harsh, and still it's so much appreciating the fact that after so many events in life, you found peace by practicing of these teachings. And also what I was so impressed in this testimony, it was the fact that actually with all the illegal research of the academy, of the Tai Ji Men Academy, and taking Dr. Hong and Mrs. Hong into custody of the police and freezing their assets and so on, and all the mass media campaign and everything, still the members of the community, they dare to practice further, they go further for all the spiritual teachings and transforming in good their lives. And here, and this is making also the move towards Mrs. Ashley Huang, the fact that both actually referred to the over 300 legislators who have held hearings and press conferences and interpellated the National Taxation Bureau in support of Tai Ji Men, but still the Bureau authority has proven superior to the court, like managed to impose the decision of the National Taxation Bureau, not the decision of the court. And how can we see this as a symbol of the democracy? The question is still pending, and we hope that the Taiwanese government will take steps into this. And of course, all the abuses which were done in this case, all the thousands of families which were discriminated, even sometimes tortured, suppression of the freedom of belief and a restriction of personal freedom and so on. We hope that all of them to be solved, and that actually they will be even given back their sacred land and compensate for their losses. And what is the most difficult, and still Miss Ashley Huang was asking for, to restore the reputation of Tai Ji Men's Shifu and disease. We know very well from the history that it's very difficult to restore a reputation. It's not like you just change a page and everything it's solved. But we still hope that at least for those who suffered so much, the abuses done by the Taiwanese government, the truth to come out, the truth to be well expressed in the Taiwanese media and in the all possible networking systems, in order that the reputation to be at least partially restored, and all these members of Tai Ji Men to feel again that they can live their lives in peace and harmony without all the blame that the society put on their shoulders. As the final conclusion of this event, I can say that scholars and human rights activists, members of other spiritual communities, encourage Tai Ji Men to struggle further in the search of applying correctly the court decision and the truth in Taiwan. The authorities of Taiwan should now act in stopping and correcting the wrongdoings and abuses done in Tai Ji Men case. I thank you very much, and we all thank you very much for joining also online and attending this event. Thank you very much to the scholars and DZ members who made testimonies. It was a wonderful event, and we hope very much for the solving of the Tai Ji Men case in Taiwan. And we will end this event with a video from Katrina Lantos Svets sharing after ringing the bell of peace. Thank you again.
I was saying, this has been a very special experience. It's something I'll remember my whole life. Truly, I will. You know, I've heard that there's a wonderful sort of image or myth or legend in the Asian world, that there's an almost invisible scarlet thread that somehow connects us to those who we are destined to be joined to in some way in this life. It can't be seen, but that scarlet thread exists. And today, as I was ringing the bell and basking in the serenity and the beauty and the kindness that all of you emulate, I kind of felt that scarlet thread. I felt a little tug connecting me to you, Doctor, to the beautiful, beautiful angel dancers, to these dignified, strong men who began and concluded the ceremony so powerfully. I must say I felt something very powerful, and I'm very grateful for that. I really actually wish that through the miracle of technology, billions of people could have been watching us, because there's a special spirit here. And I know that derives from your teachings and from your practices, but it also derives from the encompassing love that you have for all of us, the encompassing prayer and wish you have for all of us. And I think your influence will continue to be a force for good in the world. I also want to agree with all the powerful comments of my colleague and friend, Ambassador Brownback, and say that Taiwan is very much on my mind. I think of Taiwan as a beacon of freedom and of democracy. And I know it's not perfect, just as America is not perfect. We're all on that journey. But Taiwan represents something very important for the world. And it's very important that the rest of the world stand with Taiwan and make it very clear that we admire and respect and will defend this island nation that has created truly a beacon of democracy in challenging circumstances. So I thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful event, and I really will treasure this memory always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I want to send my greetings to my Tai Ji Men friends. I want to thank them for including me in an incredibly beautiful and unforgettable bell ringing ceremony. And I think that your community brought a very special spirit to this International Religious Freedom Summit. So we are grateful for your presence here. I know you have been battling for many years to achieve justice, but I want to remind you of the words of the Reverend Martin Luther King. He said, "The arc of history is long, but it does bend towards justice." So I know that it isn't easy to continue pursuing justice for your very legitimate cause and claims, but I hope that you won't lose hope. And I just want to say that we've had a really extraordinary summit with an amazing range of communities and people coming together. We've inspired each other, we've uplifted each other, and I hope that everybody who is here will now go back to their homes and their lives sort of newly energized to continue on the path of fighting for a better world, a world in which human rights, religious freedom, rule of law, and justice is really available to all of our brothers and sisters. So thank you so much.
So there is a group photograph.
Yeah. Hello, Massimo. It's right now the time for us to record this wonderful moment to take a group picture. So first of all, we would like to invite all the scholars on the stage, stay in front of the screen so that we can have a photo up there. And all the Tai Ji Men brothers and sisters. We really work day and night all together. Okay, are we ready? All the 1, 2, 3. Fighting for justice, fighting for Tai Ji Men. Jason, would you please sit down? Yeah. Alex, do you mind to one step towards to your right a little bit? Okay. So let's take another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you everyone. So thank you everyone, Massimo. Thank you, Willie.
Thank you.
All,
See you
all of
soon.
you. Hello,
we have a cultural performance in 30 minutes, and also the ceremony of ring the bell piece. So you are welcome to join